History is written by the victors. We remember the grand revolutions, the wars that redrew maps, and the leaders whose names echo through centuries. But what about the rebellions that have been lost to time? The whispered protests, the desperate uprisings, and the courageous stands made by ordinary people pushed to their absolute limit. These are the forgotten revolts, the sparks of defiance that, though often extinguished, revealed the cracks in the world's most powerful empires. From bread riots to puppet shows, from silent marches to goat-led protests, these are the stories of forgotten rebellions that shook the world, and no one even knew they happened. Until now. Our journey begins in 18th century France, years before the famous revolution. The year is 1775. The cause? Bread. A series of poor harvests and market deregulation sent flour prices skyrocketing. For the common person, this was a death sentence. This desperation ignited the flour war. Starving villagers, men and women, didn't just write letters. They marched on cities, stormed bakeries, and seized grain convoys, demanding not power or prestige, but simply the right to eat. It was a raw, primal roar for survival that foreshadowed the seismic shifts to come. Just 20 years later, across the Channel in Britain, a different kind of anger was brewing. In 1795, the government imposed a tax on, of all things, hair powder, the fine dust used to whiten the extravagant wigs of the era. The powder tax revolt wasn't about starvation, but about principle. The aristocracy and the commoners, for once united, mocked the levy. Satirical cartoons flooded the press, and people openly defied the tax. It was a bizarre, almost comical rebellion that proved even an absurd tax could unite disparate classes against an overreaching government. Let's travel east to China in the 1820s. Under the Qing dynasty, discontent was simmering. A Taoist mystic named Lin Qing saw an opportunity. He claimed divine favor and prophesied the end of the dynasty. This was the birth of the 8 trigrams uprising. Peasants, drawn to his mystical promises of salvation, joined his cause. They weren't just fighting for land, they were fighting for a new spiritual world order. The rebellion blended religion and revolt, a potent combination that showed just how deep the social and spiritual cracks in the empire truly were. Perhaps one of history's strangest acts of defiance occurred in Belarus in 1933 during Stalin's brutal collectivization. As Soviet authorities seized grain and livestock, peasants devised a uniquely creative protest. They used goats as symbols of their resistance. In what became known as the goat-led revolt, villagers would either hide their goats or defiantly lead them to government offices, a symbolic offering of their last possessions. It was a surreal, tragicomic act of defiance against an unyielding regime. Though it was brutally suppressed, this odd uprising stands as a testament to the human spirit's creativity in the face of tyranny. Let's rewind to 1647, in Naples, then under Spanish rule. The people were crushed by taxes. A poor fisherman named Masaniello, charismatic and furious, tapped into this popular anger. Overnight, he became the leader of an explosive urban revolt. Fishermen, merchants, and the poor rose up, overwhelming the authorities. For a brief, dizzying moment, Masaniello was the de facto ruler of Naples. Though his reign was short-lived and ended tragically, Masaniello's revolt sent a shockwave through Europe, a powerful reminder that even the humblest of citizens could bring an empire to its knees. Sometimes, a single dramatic act can ignite a continent. In Prague, 1618, Bohemian nobles were furious with their Habsburg rulers. In a stunning act of protest, they went to Prague Castle, seized 2 imperial regents, and threw them out of a window. Miraculously, the men survived the 50-foot fall, supposedly saved by a dung heap. But the act itself, the defenestration of Prague, could not be undone. It was the spark that lit the 30 Years' War, a catastrophic conflict that would devastate Europe for a generation, all because of a protest that went airborne. In 1917, while the world was embroiled in the Great War, a different kind of battle was being fought on the streets of Natal, Brazil. The price of feijão, or beans, the staple food, had become unbearable. Impoverished mothers watching their children starve had had enough. In the Revolta do Feijão, or the Revolt of the Belly, these women took to the streets. Their weapons were not guns or cannons, but wooden spoons and cooking pots, banged together in a rhythmic demand for food. It was a raw, powerful protest against government indifference during a time of global crisis. Back in 14th century China, the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty was facing a challenge from a secret society. Known as the Red Turban Rebellion, this movement was fueled by a blend of Buddhist prophecy and peasant desperation. Wearing distinctive red headscarves, these rebels believed they were ushering in a new age. This wasn't a minor skirmish. It was a massive, decades-long uprising that ultimately played a key role in overthrowing the Yuan dynasty and establishing the new Ming dynasty. It's a colossal event, often overlooked in Western history. Imagine a protest so powerful it needs no words. In East Germany, 1953, this is exactly what happened. Hundreds of citizens, fed up with Soviet control, marched through city streets in eerie, unnerving silence. No chants, no slogans, just the sound of shuffling feet. This rebellion of silence baffled and terrified the authorities. How do you combat a protest you cannot hear? Though it was quickly and brutally crushed, this silent march became a legendary act of wordless defiance against an oppressive state. In 1894, Los Angeles, a different kind of silent protest took root, literally. During a severe economic depression, unemployed men, part of Coxey's army of protesters, took over vacant public land. Their act of rebellion? They began to plant potatoes. The Potato Patch Rebellion wasn't violent. It was an attempt to feed themselves and make a point about their right to work and survive. Authorities, bewildered and embarrassed, eventually suppressed the peaceful planting, but it remains one of the most unusual and poignant uprisings in American history. How do you fight a government that controls everything you say and see? In Poland during the 1980s, under communist rule, dissidents found a clever answer: puppets. The Orange Alternative movement used absurdist street theater and puppet shows to mock the government. By staging surreal events, like a revolution of the dwarves, they caricatured Soviet leaders and smuggled bold political messages past the censors. It was a brilliant use of satire, proving that art and laughter can be powerful weapons against authoritarianism. Salt. Today, it's a simple seasoning. But in 16th century Venice, it was a precious commodity, essential for preserving food. So when the government imposed a harsh salt tax, the people revolted. The Salt Rebellion wasn't fought with swords, but with smuggling and civil disobedience. Venetians secretly brought in untaxed salt and flatly refused to pay the levy. This basic mineral, this simple crystal, became a potent symbol of popular defiance against an unbearable tax. The young United States faced its own tax rebellion in 1794. The federal government, seeking to pay off war debts, placed a tax on whiskey. For frontier farmers in western Pennsylvania, whiskey wasn't just a drink, it was a form of currency. They saw the tax as a betrayal. The whiskey rebellion turned violent, with tax collectors tarred and feathered. The crisis became so severe that President George Washington himself led troops to quell the uprising, a landmark test of federal authority over its own rebellious citizens. One of the deadliest conflicts in human history is one many in the West have never heard of: the Taiping Rebellion in China from 1850 to 1864. It was led by Hong Xiu-Quan, a man who, after a vision, proclaimed himself the younger brother of Jesus Christ. He amassed a huge army of peasants, promising to create a Taiping heavenly kingdom on earth. This Christian-inspired revolt aimed to overthrow the Qing dynasty and redistribute land. The war that followed was apocalyptic, resulting in over 20 million deaths. It was a transformative, catastrophic event that forever changed China. In 1890, A spiritual movement swept through Native American tribes in the American West. It was called the Ghost Dance. A Paiute prophet named Wovoka preached that if the people danced and lived righteously, their ancestors would return, the buffalo would be restored, and the white invaders would disappear. It was not a call to war, but a peaceful, desperate prayer for cultural survival. U.S. authorities, however, saw it as a threat. Their panic and fear led directly to the Wounded Knee Massacre, a tragic end to a spiritual revival that was, at its heart, a protest against annihilation. In the late 19th century, Sudan rose up against foreign domination. A religious leader, Muhammad Ahmad, declared himself the Mahdi, the guided one, prophesied in Islam. He united disparate Sudanese tribes against the ruling Egyptian and British forces. The Mahdist uprising was a masterful blend of religious fervor and guerrilla warfare. His forces, known as Ansar, famously captured the city of Khartoum. For a time, they established an independent state, a rare and stunning example of a religiously fueled revolt overwhelming the might of European imperial powers. Who knew an opera could start a revolution? In Brussels 1830, a performance of the patriotic opera La Muette de Portici, which depicts an uprising against foreign rulers, struck a chord with the audience. As the tenor sang of sacred love for the fatherland, the theater erupted. The audience poured into the streets, chanting for independence from the Netherlands. This Brussels opera riot sparked violent street battles and helped trigger the Belgian Revolution, leading directly to the birth of a new nation. Public protest was virtually unthinkable in the Soviet Union, but in 1963, a severe bread shortage in Moscow pushed citizens to the breaking point. The Moscow bread queue riot was a rare, spontaneous outburst. After queuing for hours only to find no bread, citizens erupted in anger and demanded answers. The event was so shocking to the regime that it was immediately covered up, hidden from official histories. It was a brief but significant crack in the facade of communist stability. One of history's greatest and most overlooked slave revolts took place in 9th century Iraq. Enslaved East Africans, known as the Zanj, were forced to perform brutal labor in the salt marshes of Basra. In 869, under the leadership of Ali ibn Muhammad, they rose up against the powerful Abbasid Caliphate. The Zanj rebellion was not a short-lived riot. It was a 14-year war. They won major battles, built their own capital, and even sacked the great city of Basra. It was a monumental struggle for freedom that challenged one of the world's great empires. Our final story takes us to Finland in the winter of 1596. Finnish peasants, burdened by crushing taxes to support a war, had reached their limit. Armed not with swords or guns, but with clubs, flails, and cudgels, they rebelled against their Swedish rulers. The Cudgel War was a brutal, desperate uprising of farmers against trained soldiers. Though they were ultimately and tragically crushed, their brave stand against feudal oppression became a foundational story in Finnish history, a symbol of the common person's fight for justice. These are just a few of the countless rebellions lost in the footnotes of history. They remind us that the struggle for dignity, for survival, and for justice is a universal human story. These were ordinary people who, in their time and their place, found themselves in an extraordinary battle. Their stories deserve to be remembered. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through history's forgotten conflicts. If you found these stories as fascinating as we did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, keep questioning history.